Welcome to Blues Lawyer Confessional. I'm Matt Esquire. Fender has just announced yet another sale, demonstrating once again its shift to direct-to-consumer distribution. For guitar buyers, this is great. Good guitars at low prices. But for guitar stores, this isn't so great. Fender is undercutting them. Fender just slashed the price for the Kurt Cobain Jag Stang all the way down to $917. That's the new price. My local guitar center has had a floor model on clearance for months for about $1,000, and I've been eyeballing. But for $917, I'd rather get a new one. Victor Litz, my friendly local guitar store, they've been trying to move their Jag Stang for months for around $1,100. In fact, as of the time of this recording, many shops' reverb listings still have the $1,349 price. That's right, $400 more than Fender's newest price. So how are guitar stores supposed to compete with this? This brings us to the rather sensitive subject of MAP, minimum advertised pricing. A lot of folks want to know,
My lord, is that legal?
I will make it legal.
and I'm here to say that it is illegal. Well, actually, it's not illegal. Well, actually, it is illegal. Actually, it is illegal and it's not illegal. Because when it comes to the law, the answer once again is, it depends. To understand why it's not illegal, it's important to understand vertical agreements versus horizontal agreements. Vertical, generally, where a manufacturer and a retailer come to an agreement, whereas a horizontal agreement is an agreement among competitors. And here in the United States, the former is okay, but the latter, well, that's price fixing. MAP isn't a horizontal agreement. It's a vertical agreement. And that's why here in the United States, MAP is okay. Probably the best case regarding this distinction is a case out of the Ninth Circuit in California that was ultimately decided back in 2015. In re musical instruments and equipment antitrust litigation, yeah, it's a bit of an unwieldy title, the Ninth Circuit affirmed the dismissal of a class action lawsuit that alleged price fixing involving Guitar Center, Gibson, and yeah, Fender. Not to mention NAMM as well. In fact, all 5 of the biggest manufacturers of musical instruments were named in there, as well as, like I said, NAMM, that being the trade association. The plaintiffs in that one alleged that Guitar Center, the guitar manufacturers, and NAMM conspired to implement and enforce minimum advertised price policies, the MAP policies, that fixed the minimum price at which any retailer could advertise the guitars and amps. Now, according to the plaintiffs, these MAP policies tended to raise retail prices and restrain competition. They alleged that each manufacturer agreed with Guitar Center to adopt MAP policies and that the manufacturers agreed amongst themselves to adopt the MAP policies proposed by Guitar Center. Antitrust laws here in the United States aim to protect consumers by maintaining competitive markets. That's the whole point. In fact, that's what the Sherman Antitrust law was about. To that end, Section 1 of the Sherman Act prohibits agreements that unreasonably restrain trade by restricting production, raising prices, or otherwise manipulating markets to the detriment of the consumers. That's, in fact, written right there in 15 U.S.C. Section 1, if for some bizarro reason you decide to read it. Personally, even though I get paid for it, I don't enjoy reading statutes. In analyzing the reasonableness of an agreement under Section 1, the Supreme Court has long distinguished between agreements made up and down a supply chain, the vertical agreements, such as between a manufacturer and a retailer, and agreements made amongst competitors. The Supreme Court has recognized that certain horizontal agreements, quote, always or almost always tend to restrict competition and decrease output. Classic examples of those include price fixing, dividing markets between 2 or maybe 3 competitors, or refusing to deal. Such inherently anti-competitive horizontal agreements violate Sherman Antitrust per se, by themselves. That's just an automatic violation of Sherman Antitrust. Once the horizontal agreement's existence is established, no more inquiry is required. Just having it there establishes that there's been a Sherman Antitrust violation. Vertical agreements, on the other hand, are analyzed under the rule of reason. That's where courts examine, quote, the facts peculiar to the business, the history of the restraint, and the reasons why it was imposed, close quote, to determine the effect on competition in the relevant product market. In fact, some vertical agreements have been found to have pro-competitive justifications that actually benefit consumers. The line between horizontal agreements and vertical agreements can sometimes blur. One conspiracy can involve both direct competitors and actors up and down the supply chain, and hence consist of both horizontal and vertical agreements. And in the In Re Musical Agreements case, the plaintiffs alleged that sort of hybrid. They called it a hub-and-spoke conspiracy. The traditional hub-and-spoke conspiracy has three elements. There's the hub, which is the dominant purchaser. Here it would be Guitar Center. The spokes, which are the competing manufacturers. Here that would be Gibson, Fender, Yamaha, Korg, Roland. And then there's the rim of the wheel, and that is the horizontal agreements between the various spokes. According to plaintiffs, Guitar Center was the hub, and they pressured each of the manufacturers, the spokes, to adopt MAP policies. The manufacturers, in turn, each agreed amongst themselves to adopt the policies, and that's the rim. NAM acted to facilitate these illegal agreements, allegedly, and encouraged adoption of the MAP policies, so I guess that would make them the hubcap. I don't know. It's a bad analogy, but it's not my analogy. It was the plaintiff's analogy. That's the problem. Homespun metaphors for complex economic activities can only go so far. Section 1 prohibits agreements that unreasonably restrain trade, no matter the configuration that they take or the labels that we might give them. A hub and spoke conspiracy is simply a collection of vertical and horizontal agreements, and once the conspiracy is broken down into its constituent parts, the respective vertical and horizontal agreements, then finally a court can actually analyze them as either being permissible using the vertical rule of reason, or if it's a horizontal one, a violation of antitrust per se. The plaintiffs alleged that the manufacturers shared a similar motive to collude, but a common motive doesn't suggest an agreement. Any company that believes it can increase profits by raising prices has a motive to reach an advanced agreement with its competitors. So, alleging, quote, a common motive to conspire, that simply restates that a market is interdependent, i.e., that the profitability of a firm's decisions regarding pricing depends on the competitor's reactions. That's what makes sense. Interdependence does not necessarily entail collusion, as interdependent companies may engage in consciously parallel conduct through observation of their competitors' decisions, even in the absence of an agreement. Allegations of parallel conduct, of Gibson and Fender coming to the same logical conclusion, even if you want to call it a common motive, that's just not enough. That's not going to cut the proverbial mustard. Plaintiffs also alleged that the manufacturers acted against their own self-interest by adopting MAP policies with Guitar Center. However, they failed to account for conscious parallel conclusions and the pressures of an interdependent market. An action that would seem against their own self-interest in a competitive market may just as well reflect market interdependence, giving rise to coming to that same parallel conclusion. For example, a company in an interdependent market expects that widely unfollowed price increases will be rescinded. But so long as the prices can be easily readjusted without persistent negative consequences, one company can risk being the first to raise prices, confident that if its prices followed, all other companies will benefit. That is the follow the leader process, and super competitive prices and other anti-competitive practices, once initiated, can spread through a market without any prior agreement. It can either benefit competition or it can work against competition. It doesn't require an actual agreement. They can just happen by themselves. A more extreme action against self-interest, however, could suggest a prior agreement. For example, where an individual action is so perilous that in the absence of an advance agreement, no reasonable company would make that move without an agreement. So if no reasonable company would have entered into MAP without assurances that all the others would enter into similar agreements, that would suggest collusion. But the complaint itself probably foolishly provided independent business reasons why each of the manufacturers came up with MAP policies and enforced them even absent an agreement amongst themselves. See, the plaintiffs alleged that each manufacturer was pressured by Guitar Center, that Guitar Center, acting as the proverbial 800-pound gorilla, forced them to adopt MAP policies that were advantageous to Guitar Center. And the complaint conceded that each manufacturer responded to Guitar Center's pressure and, quote, coercion by adopting MAP policies in exchange for Guitar Center's agreement to purchase large volumes of the manufacturer's guitars. So you guys come up with a MAP policy, and if you do, we, Guitar Center, will buy a whole lot of your stuff. Well, that actually makes sense. That actually is what the court said. They said that manufacturers' decisions to heed similar demands made by a common important customer, Guitar Center, that doesn't suggest a conspiracy or collusion. In fact, it supports the exact opposite: self-interested, independent parallel conduct in an independent market. Basically, they all came to the same conclusion that it's better for us to all work with the biggest retailer of our stuff, and that is a good business decision. Keep in mind, this all went down back in around 2007. There was no Sweetwater. Sam Ash still existed, but Sam Ash was not Guitar Center. Guitar Center was Guitar Center. That's it. You want to buy a guitar, you're either going to go to Guitar Center or you're going to go to your friendly local guitar store. Plaintiffs alleged that the manufacturers simultaneously implemented and enforced MAP policies with similar terms. But according to that same complaint, they said that those terms slowly evolved. So, which was it? Did they all come up with this, all at once? Or did they all kind of react to each other slowly over a period of months and years? You can't have it both ways. That's what the court said. They said that slow adoption of similar policies doesn't suggest collusion. It suggests companies responding to market interdependence. Even assuming that progressive adoption of similar policies across an industry constitutes simultaneous, the fact that it is doesn't reveal anything more than similar reaction to similar pressures within an interdependent market, or what's known as conscious parallelism. They're both evolving the exact same response at the same time. It happens in nature, it happens in business. Just because you have the exact same result doesn't mean there's an intelligent designer. It doesn't mean that there's a prior agreement. It just means that this is the logical conclusion for it to take. All of the manufacturers were dealing with the exact same customer, Guitar Center, which ostensibly exercised its considerable market power to demand similar terms from each manufacturer for its own benefit, which it's allowed to do. We have a free market system, and this is how free markets work. The manufacturer's similar response to this market pressure is a hallmark of interdependent parallel conduct, not proof of collusion. So, there you have it. MAP in the United States is not illegal. It's a permissive vertical agreement. But once you cross the pond and you get into Britain, the exact opposite happens. The UK's Competitive and Markets Authority, the CMA, found that Fender's map was price fixing. The exact same thing. Price fixing in the UK. In the UK, resale price maintenance, RPM, or vertical price fixing is defined by the CMA as when, quote, a supplier requires a retailer not to sell below a certain price, close quote, and explains that, quote, the goal is to keep prices artificially high so that consumers are then robbed of a fair deal, close quote. That's actually not what MAP is. MAP is the minimum advertised price. In other words, imagine if you're going to B&H Photos website or Micro Center or anyone else and you see click to add to cart to see the price. That is a MAP example. It's because that price would be below the minimum advertised price. The store is not saying we're not going to give you anything below MAP. It's saying we can't advertise that price. We can still give it to you. That, folks, is why MAP is illegal, except for when it's not. What are your thoughts? Do you take the American top-down pricing is okay attitude, or the British using your dominant position to cram terms down retailers' throats is bad stance? Or is this all just legal mumbo-jumbo and you just want to save first? Let us know. I'm curious. Until next time, less fiddling, more playing.